And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Steel Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of SteelCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is Steel Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. Shayne, how's it going today?
Pretty good. Unfortunately, we're going to be watching Super Bowl again. That does not feature our Steelers, but I don't think anyone expected that to be different going into the year. So, going to try to enjoy it. But it's also the Super Bowl that we predicted last time, and not exactly a hard prediction to make, but it's still kind of disappointing, I'd say overall.
Yep, Super Bowl LIX rematch of 2 years ago. Yep. And we'll sign off with our predictions again this week, Shane, because I want to see if anything has changed for you. But we got a lot to talk about today. Steelers' potential blockbuster trade moves. I think this organization is going to want to get really aggressive. We're going to talk about which trades could be on the table. Are there any that are realistic? Obviously, there's trade rumors swirling this time of year. We heard about some recently. Myles Garrett's trade request. That's a big topic. And we'll break down the Steelers' biggest positional needs. I've ranked them, Shane, and I want to see if you agree or disagree with me. It may not necessarily be the order in which these needs are addressed in the NFL draft, but I've ranked them in order of importance in the biggest overall needs for the Steelers this offseason. So let's dive in and get started with the trending news around the league this week. And the big one, Shane, Myles Garrett's trade request from the Cleveland Browns. I know he met with the organization. He told them where he was right now and what he was thinking. He insisted he wants to play for a competitor. He wrote in his message basically to the world was the plan was never to go from being drafted to Canton from Cleveland. It was to win a Super Bowl essentially. And so not hard to understand why a player might want out of Cleveland. I mean, they've been kind of a dumpster fire organization. I will say in 2023, it looked like they were at least competitive, an 11-win football team with the league's best defense. Obviously, we knew they weren't going anywhere with the quarterback situation. I think he's fed up at this point, Shane. But is this all just a ploy to leverage more money maybe in his next contract out of the Browns? Or do you think that Garrett is serious? Like, is he really going to not play unless he leaves, he gets a trade?
I do think he's serious. And I think the reason I say that is like, this is a guy that has always told you what he thinks when he's been in Cleveland. He's never been, afraid to say what he feels, what he likes to do. Like everything about him has always felt very much like what he's telling you is what it is. Right. And I think the reason he's doing this is because he understands, probably talking to them, that they don't have a clear path to getting to prominence while he's probably in his prime still. Right. They have the quarterback situation to figure out, which Deshaun Watson and everything else complicates that. They have a defense that took a step back last year, despite him still playing at the same level he's played at for several years. Just there's too much for him, I think, to worry about, to wonder if this team can compete in the next couple of years. And honestly, as much as Browns fans, I'm sure, are going to hate to hear this, this is probably the best thing for you to get what you can for Garrett now while he's still in his prime, while he's a guy that could still be considered a defensive player of the year candidate that can have the type of impact that teams around the league probably think he can still have, because you're going to get a lot for him if you do trade him. Now, I know there's money things and they have to kind of sort all that out because of the Watson contract and his contract and all that. But if you can get 2 first-round picks or more or equivalent to that in some way, that's probably the best thing for you, because he's right about the fact that they're probably not ready to compete right now.
Yeah, Shane, I agree. I think it is real. I think that it's not just the leveraging play. I think that he really wants to play for a team that has that winning mentality. He's accomplished what he's wanted to. He's got a Hall of Fame resume. He's a perennial All-Pro player. He's the reigning Defensive Player of the Year and finished as a finalist yet again for the award this season. We'll see who that ultimately goes to here real soon, tomorrow night, actually, as of this recording. But he's done all of those things. He's made tons of money over his career. He's still going to make money, whether he's in Cleveland or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Why not go somewhere else, make that money, and have a chance to compete? I understand he's the face of that franchise. He's one of the best players in Browns history, honestly. And so he has the leverage to be able to potentially make something happen. Like if he comes to them and if he decides to do like a full-blown like Le'Veon Bell, like I'm not going to play for you unless you trade me, he could be on the move. And so I wouldn't brush this off as it's nothing. And maybe he would be to that point where he's willing to maybe miss out on some money if it gets him in the location where he wants to go and with a competitor. So I think there's a lot of truth to that, but I agree with you, Shane. I think that Browns fans won't like to hear that. Obviously, getting rid of a best player, you'd like to have those guys from start to finish. But the state of this franchise is not ready to win right now. I know they've got a lot of talent. They're just as clueless at quarterback right now as the Steelers are, but they're even worse off because
they're paying a lot of money.
Like they're paying a lot of money.
Yeah,
they're going to eat a lot of dead money with the Deshaun Watson deal. He obviously had the Achilles setback. He's not going to play for him again. Like I don't think so.
I don't think he ever plays a snap for them. I mean, he might never play another snap. Period.
I know, and what a disastrous trade. It sucked away their draft capital, their finances. They're just in a bad state right now. And I think the only way out of that really is if they just got really lucky with like a rookie quarterback. You draft a Shedeur Sanders, whatever it is, with the second pick in the draft, and you're able to still find a way to win and be competitive with a rookie quarterback contract. I think that's the only way that you can kind of salvage things. If you don't get that, and if they go a different direction, hope is basically lost for that franchise, at least for the next couple of years. And you can understand why Garrett, who's pushing 30 years old now, wants to try to make it happen with a different organization. So, Shayne, I'll just ask you straight up, do you think that trade will happen this offseason? Is Myles Garrett going to go to a different team?
I think so, because I think the Browns realized that the only way that they could convince him to stay is if they made a huge move at quarterback a second time. And I just don't know what move there is to make that will actually convince him that in the next 2 to 3 years that he's confident they can make a Super Bowl. I just don't think that quarterback exists currently, at least not on the market, right? Like you could go and try to get a Geno Smith or a Matt Stafford, like we'll talk about later for the Steelers or whoever it may be. But like, is that enough for you to guarantee or feel like you can guarantee him like, hey, we're going to be in the mix for a Super Bowl? I mean, this is the AFC. Like it's really hard, no matter how good your team is, to compete for a Super Bowl in this conference. It just is. And he's probably thinking that as well. And honestly, I think he should want to go to either one of the very top competitors in the AFC, and there's a couple of them that make sense, or the NFC, where obviously that path is a little bit cleaner for a lot of teams. So it feels like it should happen. I don't know if the Browns will make it happen. I think that this is their chance, though, to kind of right the wrong of the Watson situation and get a bunch of draft capital and properly rebuild this team. Because for the most part, I like a lot of what they've done outside of that. That's the sad part. It's disastrous because of how much money you're paying him and how much you lost draft capital wise. But they're in a better spot than they have every right to be in, considering all of that. Like they made the playoffs in 2023. They were competitive with a quarterback that wasn't Watson. Like it didn't happen this year for a multitude of reasons, but they could be back in playoff contention quickly. But Super Bowl contention, I just don't see it.
Yeah, Shayne, and the Browns have had really talented rosters over the years. I mean, there was a stretch 3-4 years they had the best offensive line in the league. They've had some blue chip players on defense. It's just never been good enough. And the Browns are going to brown like they have in the past. But Garrett's not oblivious to the situation in the AFC North specifically, let alone the rest of the conference and the quarterbacks. But in the AFC North alone, you've got the Ravens and the Bengals to get past every year. And even the Steelers, they just don't finish last in the division. That's just something they don't do. If you want a safe bet, they're not going to win the division. Probably you could bet that they won't finish last though. They tend to plateau right at that 9 to 10 win mark. And so he knows the situation. I agree. I think that something could be in the works here. They're going to ask for an awful lot. Now I don't know what they'll be able to get. You mentioned 2 first-round picks. I think that would be the prize. If you can get that for a pass rusher that's pushing 30, still in the prime of his career, still playing excellent football. Some team would love to have that. And teams would throw the draft capital at that, at the Browns for a chance to go to a Super Bowl. It'd have to be a contender. I'm looking at some of the top teams in terms of salary cap right now. The Patriots too far away, Raiders too far away. Not that they wouldn't at least try to give their organization a splash, but the Commanders would make a ton of sense with over $78 million in salary cap space. They have the draft capital. They have the cap space to do it. They could make it happen. Cardinals up there. Chargers seem unlikely with their situation, but they've got money as well. Vikings. So there are teams that are considered contenders at least, or at least playoff caliber teams who could maybe get that extra jolt by doing something like this. And I think that there's going to be a lot of teams interested. I mean, 31 teams should be interested. And obviously there's 3 teams he's not going to. I can tell you that for sure. They're not going to trade him within the division. I think everything else is basically on the table if Garrett really is that disgruntled, and if he's saying that he's not going to play for them. I don't know if he's saying that or not, to be clear. But if he is saying that I won't play for you unless you trade me, that's something worth considering. You don't see this very often, for what it's worth, Shayne. Just players, like bona fide best players in the league type guys in the primes of their NFL careers, suddenly demand trades. Like, when's the last time we've seen this? You probably don't even, off the top of my head, I'm trying to think back. If you're in the chat with us here, when's the last time something like this has happened? Because
maybe Darrelle Revis when he was on the Jets.
Okay, Revis. Yeah,
because I remember he specifically wanted traded out, and he did while he was still very much one of the, if not the best, one of the best corners in the league. As far as like, I mean, that's the one that comes to mind off the top of my head. There might be others I'm not remembering, but again, it's really tough to be in the Browns position because you obviously don't want to trade away a player of this caliber. You cannot assume you can get that back with trade capital. Like, you're not probably drafting Myles Garrett. Now, if you draft Abdul Carter, maybe you get 85% of Myles Garrett, maybe even closer to 100%, because I do think he's a great player worthy of being selected up in the top 5. But at the same time, like, you are taking a step back no matter how you look at it. But they probably have to. That's kind of the thing. And I understand Browns fans aren't going to want to do this, and even the Browns front office probably doesn't want to do this. It probably is the best thing for their chances of actually finally figuring this thing out eventually and getting to a Super Bowl, or at least competing for one. So it's tough for them, but it's probably the right thing for both sides, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. Jay Molnar drops in with Antonio Brown. Yeah, Brown was one of them. He was kind of exiting the prime of his career at that point, but just such a head case.
That was also very specific of his career situation.
So, and Brown was obviously still a good player. He had had some really good moments in Tampa after that. But yeah, I think it just, the whole situation is so rare right now because Garrett really is playing good football, regardless of whether you like him or not. Brown's 3-14 record doesn't matter. Garrett is a really good football player, and there's going to be a lot of teams intrigued by that. Let's move on, and we'll bring this back to we'll keep it NFL circle right now, but we're going to bring it back to the Steelers real soon here. The Rams placed Cooper Kupp on the trade block, and so Kupp himself released a statement on his social media accounts saying that the Rams are looking to trade him. And so we would have to assume that this is the end of Cooper Kupp in LA. He's going to have $20 million coming his way this year, $12.5 million in base salary and a $7.5 million roster bonus off the top of my head, if I can remember. And so
that sounds right,
that's just, it's too rich for the state that they're in right now. I'm guessing they told him that they're probably ready to move on. And look, if McVay is ready to move on from something, he probably knows that it's time. He probably knows that there's not a lot left in the tank. He knows Kupp's injury history. Obviously, you've got Puka there, and as much as you'd like to have some insurance, maybe there's a bigger plan at play. So maybe they're going to try to go after a T. Higgins or get younger at the position because they're starting to build a good core over there. But Shayne, this is a guy we discussed a lot at the Steelers trade deadline last year. Any interest at this point? I mean, I think that window may have sailed a little bit already, but there was some intrigue last year when the Steelers were on that winning streak, looked like a playoff caliber team, and they ultimately, Rams started winning football games. They didn't want to do it. And so at this stage now, would you be intrigued at all by a Cooper Kupp trade?
I think the problem is I think he's still very much a helpful player. Like, I think that he's not the same Cooper Kupp he was even a couple years ago, and certainly not the one that was a Triple Crown winner. It's not going to be the case anymore. But he still does a lot of things that this offense requires of receivers. He blocks about as well as anybody. He's tough after the catch. Like, he's reliable in that way. But for his price tag, I just don't think anything of, like, unless you give up almost nothing of value draft pick wise, which if you're the Rams, I don't see the point in doing that. Like, you'd rather send him to a team that's willing to give you at least something of note for a guy like this. I don't think it's worth it for the Steelers route. I don't think he moves the needle enough to give up even like a 4th or 5th round pick. It's not that it's the end of the world to lose that if he ends up being good, but the price tag impacts that too. It is going to affect what they can do money wise in free agency then too.
Yeah. No, I think that that will be the case as well. And so we'll talk about a potential Rams trade deal. But
there's
what would one look
something
like
more interesting that we could talk about as part of that. But
between the Steelers and Rams. And I mean, this is what we do this time of year. And I do believe, Shayne, I really do think the Steelers will try to make a splash of some type, like 8 years without a playoff win. They know what's at stake at this point. They know that Watt and Hayward are on their last legs. They're going to try to do something. We're going to discuss in just a minute here what that could potentially look like. I do want to talk about one more trade rumor that's circulating just today, actually, is Greg Bedard of, what is he? It's Boston Sports Journal. He actually believes that Patriots quarterback Joe Milton could be on the trade block this year. He initially said, I've got his quote right here, "I thought the Patriots would hold off on entertaining a trade of Joe Milton for at least for one more season, but there's increasing belief around the NFL that the Patriots are at least contemplating a trade for Milton this offseason." Again, I'm not saying he's on the block right now, but the Patriots will likely consider it if everything settles in the front office and coaching staff. So, Shayne, I have a feeling I know your thoughts about Milton, but would this at all interest you? And let me just give a little background here. Milton has only played one game. He was a sixth-round rookie last year. Came into the season finale when the Bills were resting players. That's worth noting. But had some really impressive moments on film, at least, albeit against backups. Completed 22 of 29 passes, a pair of touchdowns, collectively, one passing, one rushing. And just one of the plays of the year that you'll see from the quarterback, it reminded me of like prime Ben Roethlisberger, some Josh Allen-y type stuff where he's holding on the ball like 6, 7, 8 seconds, making guys miss, and then finally just rips a bullet to the corner of the end zone for a touchdown pass, went like 30 air yards. And he shows you those type of plays. Would this intrigue you at all, Shayne? Let's say that they're asking for maybe a 4th-round pick in return.
The problem with it, right, is if you would have told me going into last year, like before the season happened, before I knew where Joe Milton was drafted, before I knew any of the stuff, if you would have told me that in a Week 18 game, he got in there because the team didn't want to play their starter, they were resting or whatever it was, and he went in there against mostly backups in the Week 18 game and absolutely lit it up. Like had some of the best throws of the year, had these unbelievable plays. I would have been like, yeah, that makes sense because this guy from a physical perspective is about as good as it gets. Like you don't see this amount of traits in a guy that is drafted that late very often, but there's a reason he was a 6th-round pick despite all of those traits, right? You know, because Josh Allen in college, really erratic, had a lot of things to work on, still was a top 7 pick because he was that traitsy, right? And he had enough flashes that show like, okay, this guy gets it. He just needs time to figure it out. Milton was an older prospect who played a lot of college football, who never really seemed like he was ever going to be an NFL player, really, truly. He still gets drafted because of the traits. He looks good in one game. You know, if it was something like a throwaway pick, truly like a 6th or 7th, which wouldn't make sense for the Patriots to do, obviously. You want to get value back for him as a 6th-round pick. Sure, because why not? But I'm not giving up a pick that could potentially, especially with this front office, the way they've drafted in that range, I'm not giving up a pick on a guy that I still have no idea if he can actually play NFL football. Like that game isn't enough for me to know if he can get on the field and do anything. And like, yeah, he could be a backup for you for like a Fields backup because the skill sets are at least somewhat similar. But I'm not trading away a good draft pick for the chance that he might be okay. Yeah.
Shayne, you know me. I will miss on this type of player 100 times out of 100. And last year during the draft, I wanted the Steelers to spend their 4th-round pick on him. I really did. I said, to me, in my mind, if you can get 80% of the upside out of this guy, you are getting a potentially good football player. Now, I think the chances of doing that are very, very slim. It's kind of like the Anthony Richardson, except he's got even more going against him. I mean, he played 6 years of college football, 3 at Michigan, 3 at Tennessee. Before being drafted, and only started 1 full season in college. Had some injury history there. And so what you see with him, though, is that package, and I'm intrigued by it. I would not brush it away. If I was a Steelers front office, it doesn't hurt to call. And that's what I always say in these types of situations. Call, see what the asking price is, see what they might be willing to deal him for. I mean, if they come back at you a 3rd-round pick, I mean, you're out with that. Like, you're not going to do that. But anything in my mind, Shayne, 4th or later, preferably later, but 4th or later, or a 5th-round pick this year and a 6th-rounder next year, like that kind of talk intrigues me for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Steelers don't have a quarterback under contract unless you count Skylar Thompson, and I don't. So they don't have a quarterback under contract that's worth playing on the field. This one, You started Milton for a whole season, things would probably go very badly. But in the off chance that they didn't, and he showed you enough, maybe, just maybe. I'm always shooting for the stars when it comes to quarterbacks, because I think if you shoot lower, if you aim for, I want to get a mid-level quarterback, and that's the best case scenario, that's what you end up with, you're always going to fall short. So you have to take stabs on guys with traits. I don't blame the Titans for doing it with Will Levis. I don't blame the Colts for doing it with Anthony Richardson. I think that's the way that this league is trending. It's the way you got to go.
Yeah.
I mean, the three best quarterbacks in the league, if you don't count Joe Burrow, Burrow's probably one of them, but Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson, guys with elite traits and just an immense upside at the position because of their arm talent, and especially for Allen and Lamar, their mobility. And so box checker in terms of size and tools, 6'5" and an eighth, 240 pounds. Guy can do backflips on the field. Not that it matters.
Yeah.
But he's an elite athlete at the position. And you can see flashes where he keeps his eyes down the field, scrambles around and makes plays. That's the stuff that intrigues me. We know that he can run, but he can do that stuff as well. I would at least gauge the interest. And all that to say, that's a long conversation on a Steelers podcast about a non-Steelers quarterback. But this team is in desperate need of a signal caller.
Yeah.
And just in terms of pure trait and talents, he's more talented than any quarterback in this class easily. Like this.
From a physical standpoint, no doubt. But that's the problem with him is, despite all of that talent, he was a 6th-round pick, and I haven't seen enough of him for me to be convinced that he shouldn't have still been a 6th-round pick. That's ultimately the issue. Now, in this class, would he still be a 6th-round pick? Probably not. He might be more like a 4th-round pick, because at this point, why not just take a shot on a guy like that in a class this poor? But at the same time, it'd be different if he had to get in there for a couple games and we had a legitimate sample size against NFL defenses that were out there trying to win the game truly. Not that the backups for the Bills weren't trying to win, but you get the point. But then I'd be like, okay, if I saw enough flashes in those situations, then a 4th-round pick might be something I'm willing to give up. I just don't know if I can do it for that guy, considering who he played against. So, but I understand the thought process, though. So.
I get it. One fewer red flag. If it wasn't the age and the lack of college experience, despite being there forever, and if there's one fewer red flag, I think it would be a little bit more enticing. But yeah, he might not be a quarterback. Maybe he's a tight end in the NFL still. We don't know. Just
might be a good one too if he is, but we'll see.
Might be. May take the Logan Thomas route there. Right. I want to back up 1 second here, Shayne, and go back to Myles Garrett just for a second here, because Garrett Watt. I mean, it's all we've heard since 2017. Two best players, respectively, on their franchises. This would kind of throw that off, that algorithm off a little bit, where we can't. I mean, we'd still compare the two together, but people are also saying now, well, TJ Watt would never. This is nothing he would do. Shayne, do you think that this is? And Watt said, I want to finish my career with the Steelers. I want to win here. He did make that evident. Do you think that that Watt would ever do something like this? I'm not saying that I fault Garrett for what he's doing. I'm just saying Garrett has more playoff success than Watt does. I mean, Watt's still looking for his first playoff win. And so is that something that Watt would be justified in doing at this stage? He's looking for a new contract as well. The Steelers won't trade him, so I'm not even going to entertain that thought. But would he ever come to the organization and say that he wants out?
I don't personally think he would. I just don't think that's in his makeup. It doesn't seem like it's something he would want to do. I think he really values playing for the Steelers and finishing his career here. But would he be justified in doing so? Of course. If you're a player on the other side of 30 that is still as good as he is, despite last year being a weird season for him, where it's even more splash play heavy than the normal, but less consistency, you want to win, right? You want to win before you end up not being that player anymore, because you don't know how much longer you can do it for. In this league, no matter how good you are, this league will very quickly chew you up and spit you out if you aren't good enough anymore. And I think he wants that chance to win. I think he wants to do it here. But if he told us, hey, it's not happening here, I want you to trade me somewhere that I have a chance to win, he'd be perfectly justified in doing so.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it would be justified, but I don't think it's going to happen. I do think this thing's going to linger on, though, and he'll probably get that extension late in the offseason, going into the summer, kind of like his last one he got. R. Barley chimes in here. I get you guys' train of thought. This is talking about Milton, I'm sure. But this is a franchise who spent the number 1 pick on Pickett, who was older and about half or 1/4 of the physical tools. Hey, you're preaching to the choir here, because 10 times out of 10, I would rather gamble on the Milton type player than the Kenny Pickett. I saw nothing in Pickett. Pickett was actually my 5th quarterback in a really bad quarterback class, and it shows you kind of where my thoughts were on him.
I will say to that too. I agree, but also 2 wrongs do not make a right, and I worry that it'd be just 2 wrongs, just for different reasons.
It could be.
That's all I'm saying. Now, again, in a hindsight, like, would I have rather drafted a guy that looks and plays like Joe Milton than Kenny Pickett? Sure. But I don't really feel confident about either one of them being NFL quarterbacks. So it's kind of like, pick your poison at that point. So, but
yeah, no, at least Milton is a guy that you got on day 3 and Pickett.
Right, exactly.
You had to take him in the first round.
Yeah, if
I
was taking
so
Pickett in the 3rd or something, whatever, I would have.
Oh man, right, well, the fact that the next quarterback didn't go off the board until Desmond Ridder in the 3rd round, and then it was Matt Corral.
I think it was Matt Corral. Did Matt Corral go first? I thought was he the second quarterback?
It might have been Corral. I mean, it was Corral. Yeah. Corral was a 3rd rounder. Ridder was a 3rd rounder, and Malik Willis.
Yeah, they all went.
And then Sam Howell in the 5th round, who I actually like Sam Howell better than Pickett, but whatever. I mean, they
all suck except for like one of them. So
it was such a bad draft. That's why I don't want them to make the same mistake. We're going to talk about this quarterback class actually here in a little bit as well. Let's move on to our first big topic of the day. That was a lengthy news segment to open up with all of this shit.
Hey, a lot going on with it.
There is. It's fun to talk about too. All right. Steelers Rams blockbuster trade, potentially not going to happen, but I do want to outline this, Shayne, because I do think the Steelers will try to do something. It's probably not going to be this for several reasons that we'll talk about here, but you try to think of what can this team do that's not the status quo, because I think that they know at this point, you can't get away with running it back with Russell Wilson. Even the Justin Fields option is less than enticing, despite what Art Rooney said about his interest in bringing one of these guys back. I think they need to do something more. I think they know they need to do something more. The fan base is fed up. And so I think that they're going to try to make some sort of splash. Now, that can come in a couple of different ways. We'll talk about what the other options might be, but one of them could potentially involve the LA Rams. This is a team that has a 37-year-old quarterback, a 32-year-old wide receiver. And right away, Shayne, the light bulb goes off where I'm saying, well, let's think about it this way. The Rams have a really young core, actually, outside of that. You Puka, guys to build around on defense, and Braden Fisk, and drawing a blank here, pass rusher who was awesome this year, rookie of the year, Jared Verse. Yeah. So they've got a young core to build around outside of 2 old players there. The Steelers, on the other hand, Cam Hayward turns 36 this offseason, shortly after the draft. TJ Watt will turn 31 years old during the season. I mean, if you're going to do it, but you can't stay where you're at. You got to go all in, or you got to go all out. And we know the Steelers aren't going to go all out because it's just not what they do. So if you're going to go all in, who cares if you get guys that are 30 plus years old at this point? Make the window line up, and maybe you crack that window open for 2 years, and that would be it. I can't imagine stretching it to a 3rd year, but maybe a 2-year window. If you were to pull off a miraculous trade package for Matt Stafford, you get your quarterback, and you get a receiver he is very familiar with in Cooper Kupp. You still add to that, and that gives you the four of the most important players on your team would be in their 30s. And when that 2-year window is over with, it's done. Put a fork in it. The Steelers are going to have to do a hard rebuild after that, or probably in their minds more of a soft rebuild, but we know that they would essentially need to start over. That's my thought process, Shayne. I want to preface with that to say that I don't think it's very realistic, but Stafford has a good contract that you can absorb. Cooper Kupp has a not good contract that the team would actually have to be very generous with the Steelers. They'd either have to trade him away for essentially nothing, a late round pick, 6th, 7th round pick, because Kupp has $20 million coming his way at this stage of his career is just not worth that. Or the Rams would have to absorb that. Now, if you put the two together, you can say those contracts kind of balance each other out. And then I don't know what compensation you'd be looking at that point, Shayne. The Rams will want, obviously, it's a fairly hefty return if they're going to be willing to get rid of a quarterback. I don't think Stafford wants to go anywhere. I think he wants to stay in LA. But is that something that would even intrigue you if you were the Steelers at this point? Is there more intrigue trying to make a play for a quarterback wide receiver like that, rather than just going back to the status quo of saying, we're going to have Russell Wilson, we're going to stream Justin Fields, whoever it is next?
I think because of the situation the Steelers are in, like you said, I would take that shot if it was available to me, because Stafford, Kupp, Pickens, you assume if he sticks around, potentially another receiver you add if you're able to, and whatever else you're able to add to the offense and defense in the offseason gives you a much better chance to compete this year than not having those players on your roster, right? Like, I don't think there's any combination of things they can do outside of that would actually give them even a puncher's chance at not only winning the division, but having a chance to win playoff games, right? Because we've seen what Stafford can do in the playoffs whenever he's on, and very easily could have beaten the Eagles had his offensive line forgot to block Jalen Carter in the last drive. So I think the upside of it intrigues me. The problem is, I think Stafford, if he is going to get traded, it's only going to be on his terms. He's not going somewhere that he doesn't want to go. He's just going to retire if they don't want him to play, or he's going to say, I want to play with you. Like, I don't think that he's just going to get moved to wherever they feel like. And unfortunately, I don't think Stafford would be interested in coming to the Steelers, because as much as people, players will say they love playing for Mike Tomlin, I don't know if Stafford really looks at Arthur Smith in this offense and says, I can make that a playoff offense. I can make that an offense that threatens. I would not want to play for Smith if I was Stafford, me personally. So that's kind of where the issue ultimately lies for me, is I don't think Stafford would be up for it. But if he was, I would certainly entertain it.
Yeah, it would be hard to go from Sean McVay to Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh. And I agree. I don't think it's something that they're going to be interested in. I don't think that the Rams would do it either, because they're closer to winning a playoff game than the Steelers are right now.
Certainly
I think they showed that this past year. So maybe they will just ride it out with a 37-year-old Stafford and say, hey, we're going to try to give it one more shot here. If you want to come back and play football, you're on our team, and we will try to give it one more push here in this closing window that they have as well, because eventually they're going to be in the same boat where the Rams are going to be looking for a long-term option at quarterback too. Now, you would like to think that some teams would be a little bit more proactive and say, hey, we can potentially trade out of this now, start our rebuild in advance. We're going to get ahead of the curve here, get something from these guys, get something from Stafford and for Cooper Kupp, for our players that are aging out here with our organization, and we'll put that back towards a rebuild. But every team does like to win now. Sean McVay likes to win. We saw that, how aggressive he got with those trades back when they won the Super Bowl 4 years back. So I don't think that he would have interest in doing that. And so I don't think that I say all this to say that I don't think that a Steelers-Rams trade is realistic, at least a package that includes the quarterback and wide receiver. Now, maybe the Steelers would have some interest in a Cooper Kupp trade, but I do think that would have to involve the Rams maybe eating that roster bonus that he has coming his way, or something. They'd have to do something to aid the Steelers a little bit in that, because Pittsburgh can't afford to absorb that. Otherwise he'll end up getting cut. And so if that ends up being the case, and from what I heard, the Rams are willing to do that, but they would obviously want a higher draft compensation if they eat that. And so if they were going to eat his roster bonus, Shayne, then it becomes much more manageable. Cooper Kupp would be $12.5 million in base salary this year, with a guaranteed salary of $5 million. And then next year, $14.85 million. It's not a cheap receiver, but for one with his resume, it becomes much more respectable. Is that something that you would do, Kupp alone, if the Rams were willing to eat some of that money?
As long as it still was like a 4th-round pick at the most, I would consider it, because again, there's just nothing at receiver we're confident about, because as good as Pickens is, we're still not really confident about him overall because of a multitude of things. So it at least would give you somebody that is going to play hard, going to be somebody who you can use as a blocker, like I said, who does a lot of the stuff that they need the receivers to do in this offense. So I would be interested if they can make it cheap enough, because that's ultimately the issue. You don't want it to hamstring you while trying to build up this team for next year, because Kupp is a win now move. So you can't let that be the one move you make, right? It can't be the biggest move you make, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about some of the other trade options around the NFL right now, Shayne. And we're just speculating at this point based on contract figures, based on the state of certain organizations. Are they going to want to move on? And one of those, and tell me, because you might brush this off and say, yeah, we're better off with what we have. But Derek Carr is in an interesting situation in New Orleans right now. Now, Carr's look decent at times. I don't think that he's like this massive needle mover or anything, But his contract situation right now, he's got a cap number coming his way, $51.45 million this season. Shayne, that in 2026, that goes up to $61.45 million. There is no chance he's on the Saints roster at that cap figure, and probably shouldn't be this year because of that. Now they would eat $40 million in dead money if you trade him before June 1st. If you trade him afterwards, though, they can save $40 million against their salary cap, and they are in just a wicked bad salary cap situation. New Orleans has been in there for a long time now. So, yeah. Having said that, I'm seeing the head shake coming in already. It's a no on Derek Carr then from you, Shayne.
If Derek Carr gets cut, and then you could have him for like relatively low amount of money, it's like so the bigger problem to me is that, yes, the money for Carr is insane, so it'd have to be not that cap, but you have to mess with that. But the problem with Derek Carr historically is that if you give him the opportunity to be conservative, he's going to be conservative. So he needs a play caller that prevents him from being conservative, that specifically calls plays in a way where it's pretty much, if you try to check down here, we're going to lose the game, basically. Like, this is a design shot play, and that's what worked early in the season before it all fell apart. But if you bring him to this offense, he will set the record for passes thrown under 5 yards downfield. Like, there's no way that this pairing works to me. Him and Arthur Smith are like the worst combination of things, in my opinion. Like, he will run the football whenever asked to. He will not complain about not throwing the ball down the field. It just doesn't feel like a good combination, no matter what the money might be.
Yeah. In terms of play style, Shayne, Derek Carr is like that introvert that goes to like the school dance who needs like a wingman to prompt a little more courage there. I agree. Like, Carr is too conservative. I don't have a lot of interest in that. I don't like the salary cap situation, although assuming the Saints were willing to eat his roster bonus and the money coming his way, the base salary is $30 million. That's very doable
in the NFL
compared
nowadays,
to NFL starting quarterbacks these days. I mean, heck, Daniel Jones was making $40 million a year up until just recently with the Giants, which is a bad contract. But then the base salary goes up to $50 million in 2026. So even
Saints
that is
are
like
just absolute.
I mean, no guaranteed money next year, but it's still it's just we've reached desperation mode, Shayne, to say the least.
Only the Saints though could have Derek Carr be cut by the Raiders and then give him that contract. Only the Saints would be capable of something like this. Like, it is truly remarkable that they even can even have an offense and a defense out there. Like, it's like the fact that they can even field a team sometimes amazes me, because they do stuff with the cap that's like, I understand it all works out and the money all checks out, but it's like, you shouldn't be doing this just because you can. It feels like every year they take on the challenge of like, how can we spend more money than is physically possible but still get out of it? And it's like, you don't have to do that. Like, it's not a requirement, guys. You could eventually just stop doing it, but they just keep doing it.
It just shows you what a premium position quarterback is, and teams are willing to overpay to get at least a respectable player. Jay chimes in. Is it really what Smith's offense is known for? Checkdowns? I don't think that is Smith's intention, but when you combine a relatively conservative offense with the most conservative head coach and owner basically in the NFL, you're going to get a really conservative game plan. And that's what we're seeing, unfortunately. I think part of the reason Tomlin hired Smith is because he knew, and they had this probably agreement, if you would ask him, that they would try to keep the ball out of harm's way. And so that's what the Steelers have been able to do. It's just, you're not making enough big plays.
Like, it's not so much that Smith wants him to throw checkdowns, is that Carr's going to throw the checkdowns that are part of the game plan all the time. Like, Jaylen Warren, if he were to come back, would probably have like 100 catches, which, granted, with the receivers, maybe that's not the end of the world, but I don't want that to be the case. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, agreed. Shayne, I got another one here for you, and you might laugh this one out harder than the last one.
Derek,
but I got to throw it out there because there's going to be talks about this. Right. You mark my words. There's going to be talks about this.
Okay.
Aaron Rodgers in black and gold this year. Rodgers did not have a good season with the Jets. I don't know if they're going to stick with him now that they've got new coaching staff in place over there. The financial situation is odd, to say the least, because the cap number is only $23.5 million this year, and they structured that deal in a way that would open up that window these past couple of years in this season. Now next year, they're eating void money into the future. So they got a $63 million cap hit stretched out through 2029. They're going to be eating money from Rodgers' deal. And that's just what you do when you try to open up a window. I understand the thought process there. But for this year, the $2.5 million base salary, and Rodgers would want more money, I'm sure. But is this something that intrigues you at all? If the Jets were able to find a way to do it now, for what it's worth, New York would lose $25.5 million in salary cap because of their $49 million cap hit. If you trade him, that's still the same. You trade him post June 1st, which again, you got to wait a long time. You're only eating $14 million of dead cap space, which is a significant difference there. So it's doable in that regard if he ends up not getting cut. Maybe you'll get flat out cut. Is that something that would interest you at all, Shayne? Would you rather have Aaron Rodgers over a Russell Wilson or
I
Justin
think
Fields?
unless he gets cut, I'm not touching it. Like if he gets cut and I don't have to give up anything and he signs for a relatively cheap contract, all things considered, then whatever. But I'm also kind of personally done with Aaron Rodgers and for a lot of reasons, many of which have now become football reasons because he just isn't as good as he used to be. The biggest thing is I don't think Rodgers would come here unless he gets to do the whole charade, right? Where it's like, let me pick this guy up from here. Let me grab this guy from here. Hey, Devontae, you want to come over here? And I don't view this front office and coaching staff as the type that would let themselves get pushed around by a player, no matter how good they used to be. And so I don't see that happening. I think if Rodgers plays in 2025, it's either for the Jets because they work things out, or a team that is so desperate that they're willing to upend their organization essentially and give him whatever he wants, which I don't think he has the power to do anymore. So,
yeah, I would agree. I think that there's going to be some discussion about that, especially if Rodgers ends up getting cut. I mean, you better believe that Steelers will be one of the most talked about teams. Oh, here's Aaron Rodgers' odds to land with the next team. The Steelers top of the list.
Yeah.
So it's kind of where they are right now, and I understand it. I mean, I understand you don't have a quarterback under contract, so I mean, Rodgers was not good. He was not good this year, and I think that he just might be toast. And he had a really, really awesome Hall of Fame level career, multi-time league MVP, Super Bowl winner, all that stuff. But at some point, you just don't have it anymore. And I think in addition to the sideshow stuff that you're getting, he also might just not be that good. And he's going to be turning 42 years old, I think, late in the season next year. He's an old quarterback. So I think Peyton Manning was only like 38 when he won that Super Bowl. When he was
admittedly, he did have
washed
the neck thing that kind of accelerated that. But yeah,
he did.
Rodgers doesn't look the same. And frankly, like I think the funniest thing that could happen is that he ends up with the Vikings and completes his Brett Favre arc, and ends up with the Vikings after the Jets. Just hopefully without the Medicaid fraud after that. Just don't do that part, please. But in general, I wouldn't be surprised if he's just done. I think the league might be done with him.
Yeah, Shayne, the only other name that I have here, quarterbacks, in terms of worth throwing out there at all, Kirk Cousins. I think that the ship has sailed on that. The contract is horrendous. I can't believe how much he was able to get at that stage of his career and coming off an Achilles.
Nobody makes money like Kirk Cousins, man.
So they literally just can't get out of his deal. I mean, the Falcons can't get out of his deal. They would have $65 million in dead money if they tried getting out of it this year. Now, by next year, you can cut him, save $32.5 million, which I'm sure they'll do by then. He's about to be the league's most expensive backup. Yeah. He's gonna be sitting riding the bench and having a $40 million cap number coming his way this year is just wild. But long shot there. If there's anything that they could do with that at all, again, it would have to be a post June 1st trade, and that way they're eating minimal dead money with that deal and getting significant cap savings. Whether or not would they be willing to do that, and if Steelers would be willing to wait that long for an aging quarterback who's not better probably than the options you have right now is probably a no. So Shayne, here's where we are. And we discussed the quarterback situation last week. Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, probably not going to do it with a draft pick probably this year. Not. Like, who is that guy going to be? Like, I think this early signs point to Justin Fields. Would you agree?
I agree. I think the early signs point to Fields. I do think the starting quarterback for week one probably was on the roster last year. Like, that's the best way I can describe it at this moment in time. Now, do I want it to be Fields over Wilson? Yes. Would I be shocked if it was Wilson over Fields? Not particularly, because this team never fails to amaze me with their ability to just look past flaws and not realize they don't have to do something. So again, Wilson, Fields should be in the front runner. Like, they should be the front runners for this position still. And outside of something else popping open that we're not expecting, I kind of think that it is going to be one of those two.
Yeah, I think that is the safest bet for sure right now. I think the splashes that we're referring to are probably going to be happening elsewhere, not at the quarterback position, even though quarterback is ultimately the biggest problem that needs to be fixed. You're going to have to find a franchise guy eventually here. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. And if anybody in here in the chat, if you could leave us a comment, like this stream, help us get seen. If you're liking what you're hearing, please tell your friends about it. Shayne, let's move on to, and we're going to do this part briefly because we still have to do rank our biggest positional needs. But we talked about the Senior Bowl last week. And at the time we were a couple practices in. Now we've watched a full week of practice. We watched a Senior Bowl game for whatever you can take away from that. It's not a whole lot, but I did go back, third, fourth, fifth time, watch a Senior Bowl tape. I watched the all 22 cut-ups that they have from the Senior Bowl. And so I got a pretty good feel of how things went down there. And I just want to go position by position really quickly. If there's any names that stand out to you at a position that I don't mention, Shayne, pop in and share your thoughts on those. But some of the guys that stood out in a negative and a positive light at the Senior Bowl, Jackson Dart, I thought he was a riser for me. I don't think that he had this otherworldly Senior Bowl, but I thought that he showed the type of plays that he can make, the throwing on the run, the different arm angles, a little bit of his creativity there. He has that very, very much a Patrick Mahomes-y type build to his game, but at a totally different level of arm talent that we're talking about here. He does not have that arm, but he is one that intrigues me. And I thought he made a couple nice plays in the Senior Bowl. Don't know if you got a chance to watch that, Shayne, but he had a throw on the run for the 2-point conversion attempt that was good. He had a rushing touchdown. So I think that Dart is a little bit of a riser here. Any thoughts on that? Do you want me to keep going just down the list, Shayne, and then chime in when you want to?
Just because Dart's kind of the biggest name that came out of that in terms of like people calling him a riser at the quarterback spot. I just still don't see it with him. I just simply don't. I think, and I think a Senior Bowl event is hard for quarterbacks because it's really hard to show anything new. It's really easy to look bad in an event like this because you're new receivers, you have a new offense you're trying to run, you have a new offensive line, you're trying to do everything with new guys. I think he looked fine, but I think that because he has better physical tools than a lot of the guys there, he was going to look a little bit better, right? Now, you could have been Jalen Milroe, who I'm sure you'll mention here in a second, and been markedly worse than people expected, and that becomes a problem. But I think he just kind of maintained the status quo for me, despite the hype coming out of the Senior Bowl for him now.
Yeah. And I think that's perfectly fine take too. Like I said, I don't think it was anything. I just, you saw some flashes of maybe this guy could be something in the league. And so there's not that many quarterbacks that I even draft this year. Honestly, there's like 5 guys I would spend draft capital on. The rest, I think, heck, if you can get them as undrafted free agents, so be it. Talk about a few others right here because quarterback is something that's on the dock for sure. Art Rooney made that really clear when he addressed the media. He said, we could draft one this year, and we're likely to draft one the following year. So I wouldn't be surprised if this year is the mid-round quarterback, next year is the first-round quarterback. Like I think that's where we're trending right now from the early indications. Another guy that I thought at least has really impressive tools is Tyler Sheff. Yeah. I mean, this guy can sling it. And so he's got a rocket arm. I just don't. He's big, almost 6'5", 224, big hands. He's got the tools. What do you do with a guy that turns 26 during his rookie year? Like that's just what I don't know. I feel like he was literally Justin Herbert's backup at Oregon. And so that's how long he's been in college football. So as much as I like him, I don't know what you can expect to get out of this guy. You're talking about a day 3 quarterback here. So I think it's worth a dart throw there to see if it sticks, and maybe he can end up doing something for you. But he was a guy who at least impressed by his physical.
Yeah, he's the guy that I think if you are looking for a guy that can come in and be a really good backup for you because he can make all the throws and you're not limited by his ability to actually complete passes down the field and to different levels of the field, that's a good fit. but he just doesn't have the athleticism that typically you look for anymore. He doesn't have the kind of high level play at college, except for really his last year. So it's just very much a like you take him as a backup and hope that he can win you some games occasionally. So.
Yeah. No, I think that my thoughts are the same exactly, Shayne. I want to talk about Jalen Milroe a second. He couldn't have been more disappointing. I think he had a couple nice drops in the bucket down the field. Outside of that, it was really ugly. And it doesn't help that he had 8 3/4 inch hands, which is what Kenny Pickett's came in at his pro day. They were even smaller at the combine. I just don't have interest in that. I think that he really needed to show up, and he didn't. Only in a negative light, really, with his performance at the Senior Bowl. So that's one I don't think I'm touching him.
I think the problem for him is just there's so little consistency to his game as a passer. And I mean, he is an elite athlete at the position, like about as good as it gets, right? But he just doesn't have everything else you need right now to actually go out and play. And so it quite begs the question, like, do you draft him as a true developmental quarterback? Because there's not many of those guys, honestly, that exist. But this is one where, like, he should sit for probably 2 years and be in the same offense for a couple of years and have a chance to actually learn it and try to figure out his mechanics. Yeah. Sure, but you can't draft that guy anytime on even probably day 2 at this point if you want to actually take a good quality shot at quarterback. So it's tough for him.
Yep, agreed. Moving on quickly, running backs here. I liked Bashal Tutin, Devin Neal, and Jarquez Hunter. I thought they all did pretty well. Those were guys I was interested in before the Senior Bowl, and they didn't disappoint me. The one who did disappoint me, I would say, is Ollie Gordon. I'm just not a huge fan of his game overall. Came in a little bit heavy, 233, and I just don't think that he's got that juice, wiggle, burst, and everything that you want. He looks the part, but I think that I don't want to get stuck with another one in the Najee type mold where it's like you just don't have enough burst to make this work. Now, maybe you give him at a discounted price. Maybe that would end up being a good football player for you as like part of a 1-2 punch, but I wasn't super intrigued by him.
Yeah, I think Gordon's problem ultimately is he just doesn't have, like you said, the juice isn't really there. So you have to have the type of season he had in 2023 where the vision was immaculate, the ability to quickly make cuts and like make guys miss in short areas and then use what speed you do have to get out and use your tackle breaking ability. Like he's very similar to Najee in a lot of ways. I think he's a little faster in the open field than Najee is, especially like in 2023 he was. Yeah. But he fits a certain scheme, and I don't think he fits ours. Like that's one of the reasons why I don't think Najee will be back is just not a fit for what we're trying to do. Tutin, on the other hand, guys like him, Devin Neal as well, not the best long speed in my opinion, but I have him as my 7th running back, and he's probably going to keep moving up a little bit. He just does a lot of things well, and he's built very well. So both guys very interested in. So.
Moving on to wide receivers, Jack Besh, not a separator, but just a good physical football player. He just wins. The guy just wins, and he's physical. Jaden Higgins, I thought was good. Tez Johnson, that stage favors him immensely because of his speed and quickness. So I do think it was a little bit inflated, that performance in terms of what you would get, but 156 pounds, very concerning there. Xavier Restrepo, we talked about how just short he came in, but I think Restrepo is a good receiver. Those are kind of the highlights of the receivers for me at the Senior Bowl in terms of the guys that stood out.
Yeah, I agree. I think Besh and Higgins are just two, like those feel like guys who, like, if you really need to hit on a receiver, those feel like good options. Like I don't know if either of them are ever going to be more than like a really good wide receiver 2 at the best, but there's a lot of teams that need that, right? Like there's a lot of teams that have maybe a receiver they really like but don't have someone to pair with him. And actually thinking about it, Jack Besh, like that's a guy that for a lot of reasons you have to circle like 7 times to the Rams. Like could that be their 2nd round pick, or could that be, whoever ends, like wherever they end up taking them? Like that would be a good fit as a replacement for what Kupp has done for them.
Yeah, and you talk about for the Steelers, I mean, last year they took Roman Wilson, who was one of the standout wide receivers at the Senior Bowl. I think you could argue that Roman Wilson had the best Senior Bowl of the wide receiver group last year. It was a really good performance. I think that there's a chance, just looking at the names on this list, these are day 2 guys. A lot of them are. And so there's a pretty good chance that Steelers wide receiver that they draft this year was at the Senior Bowl, unless they're taking one in the 1st round with a guy like Matthew Golden and Mika Igbukwe, something like that. Otherwise, it could be one of those guys that we just talked about there. Obviously, some fit better than others. Like Restrepo, I just don't think you can take another 5'9" slot only type receiver when you have the guys Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin on your roster.
Yeah.
So some fit better than others, obviously. Real briefly, offensive line, because I know that this isn't a pressing need for the Steelers. Gray Zabel, I thought, was the best overall. Yeah. Gray Zabel had a great overall performance. The North Dakota State interior offensive lineman was a tackle. I was not impressed with Josh Connerly Jr., who is the Oregon offensive tackle, got bulldozed a couple times at Senior Bowl practices. And that's about all I've got to say about that, because I don't want to spend too much time on that. Tight ends, impressive tight end group, Mason Taylor, Elijah Arroyo.
That's
some good receiving tight ends at the Senior Bowl for sure. And there's two tight ends that are probably going to go in the first round this year. So a pretty good group overall. Defensive line was where it's at. And I'm sure that you've all heard that by now. If you listen to this podcast, that's where Mike Tomlin, Omar Khan, Tara Lawson, if you wanted to look for those guys, just look no further than the defensive line group.
Yeah.
That's where they hung out. Not hard to see why. Defensive line, like as a position, was just the winner of the Senior Bowl, because they were just so dominant collectively as a group. And some guys that really stood out there, obviously, some of the edge players that only stayed there a day or two. I mean, you had the Mike Greens and Shamar Stewart, but there were other ones who stood out as well. I mean, Walter Nolan left early, and he's a guy that we're hearing mixed things about that. We'll get more into that later. TJ Sanders, I thought, had a really good Senior Bowl. Deion Walker's that polarizing player. I thought he was very up and down, didn't play with great pad level, but you can see flashes.
He also left early.
Can't teach the size. The one that I was disappointed with, and I don't know how much interest the Steelers have anyway, Landon Jackson. Just a big, long edge rusher, just too stiff, though. I think that he almost needs to bulk up and just move inside. But that's just my thoughts on that group there.
Yeah, I mean, basically the way my biggest takeaway from the Senior Bowl was just, if you need trench play, you can get it.
You got it.
From you can get it in this, from this group, in this class in general. Like, I'm about to start my edge and defensive line watches. Like, I am certainly thrilled to be doing that. I'll tell you that much. I'm also a big fan of the line class overall on the offensive side. Now, again, Steelers probably aren't looking heavily into that. At least I hope not, because they got to find out if the guys they've already taken are good or not first before we worry about doing that. Maybe late in the draft, whatever. But this defensive line group can play for sure.
Yeah, skipping over edge and linebacker, I don't think that's a pressing need. Steelers could draft one of each late in the draft, but it's not even a guarantee they will. So I'll try to keep it Steelers centered here. We'll just talk about cornerbacks before we move on to our next topic here. And there were some players who stood out in a positive light. Maxwell Hairston, I thought, had a really good Senior Bowl. Came in on the light side, 5'11", 179. So needs a little bit more sand in the pants probably at the next level. Darian Porter, if you want like the Joey Porter type clone, he had some good plays. And I think the best overall, where is he here? I'm looking for Azuray Thomas.
Yes, so another Steelers type for sure, 100%.
Yes, and he had a really strong Senior Bowl. So definitely some names there to watch. You're talking about day 2 guys. I don't think any of them are first round picks, but day 2 cornerbacks who very much could be on Pittsburgh's radar at that point. I don't think a cornerback is out of the question on day 2. I'd be really surprised if they went there in the first round, but day 2 I think is certainly an option to address.
That's the sweet spot for corner. Like, I still have to get to my overall corner rankings and everything and watching those guys, but it feels like, because of like the fact that Hunter and Johnson and guys like that are likely to go before us, the guys that are in that range for us, like, the Trey Amos of the world, if Morrison's health checks out, somebody like him out of Notre Dame, like, they could be in play, but I think they're more likely to be late first, and then you start getting into the day 2 guys. So.
Yeah. Nope, I agree. Jay chimes in here again. Besh has such a late breakout age and seems like an outlier. Would rather go first round wide receiver. And I totally get that mentality as well. Besh is not a surefire prospect, though I do think that he is a natural, pretty well-rounded wide receiver. Breakout age, there is something to that. More often than not, you can look at Player Profiler, check out breakout age for wide receivers, and a lot of the guys that are break out at 18 years old end up being good football players. If it takes you longer to make your mark in college football, sometimes there's a reason for that. Not always. There are exceptions to that as well. But
to be fair, he was an LSU Tiger for a while.
He was at LSU, and he was behind a packed wide receiver.
It's hard to stand out among that group, admittedly. He plays a game that like is very specific and doesn't really matter to me about the breakout age, because he fits a role that I think certain offenses are going to value more. Like, I think for the Rams, the Niners, those types of offenses, he's easily a day 2 type of player. For other offenses, he might be more of an early day 3 player. Like, it just kind of, I think he's more of that type of guy, not like a Xavier Legette who goes in the first round or stuff like that. So,
yeah, for sure. You are looking at a talent tier gap when you're talking about the first round wide receivers to the day 2 type players. And so we'll see where the Steelers end up going. We can make our predictions. I had my first mock draft drop a couple of days back. So if you want to go check that out, it's on stillcurtain.com. We're going to keep the mocks rolling throughout, whether you like them or not.
I'll be diving into that soon as well myself. So we'll see. But
excellent. And we're going to try to predict what the Steelers will do in the draft. And we, by the end of this thing, Shayne, you and I, we get a really good sense.
We're usually pretty good with that. So
I do want to spend just a few minutes here, but in our last topic for today, ranking the biggest positional needs of the Steelers this year. This is not a prediction of which needs they will address with the most capital. It's my feelings on what are the actual biggest needs on the team heading into the 2025 offseason. So let's do this briefly, Shayne. I'm going to talk about each one.
Real quick, did you want to do your early draft film comps?
I could do that. I could do that real quick. You know what? Let's save it. We'll save the comps, and I'll do that on a different show when we talk more draft stuff, since we're running a little bit long today.
Yeah, no problem. So we're going to do the rankings then.
Let's rank the biggest positional groups, Shayne. Tell me where I'm wrong, because after I do each one of these, I'm going to give my reasoning. I'll give you a chance for rebuttal, and then I'll go to the next one. We're going to start with number 5 and work our way up. Number 5, biggest positional need for the Steelers is cornerback. Okay, you can say boundary cornerback. You can say slot cornerback. I would lean slot more so than boundary. I like Corey Trice. I just don't trust the guy to stay healthy, and the sample is so small. I loved the prospect coming out of school. I thought talent-wise, he was on par with Joey Porter Jr. I don't think that's crazy at all. And I think that you can see the flashes with him, but I don't trust him to stay healthy. And knowing how little the Steelers have invested in him, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they try to turn the page on him and draft another boundary cornerback and move him just back to being a reserve player who comes in the event of an injury. Having said that, I think the slot corner is even potentially a bigger need. Beanie Bishop was very up and down. I think he showed flashes. Cam Sutton was horrendous, and he won't be back with the Steelers. And so you're going to be looking at a group that has several different pieces here. But I would argue that cornerback is the 5th most important position on this team, because you at least have the worst case scenario right now, Shayne, the worst case, and it's going to be better than this, but you're going to go into next season with Joey Porter and Trice as your boundary cornerbacks and Beanie Bishop in the slot. I can live with that if I absolutely had to. Obviously, you want more depth, stability, and security at that position, but I would say that cornerback is number 5 on the list for me.
I agree, because this is the key distinction amongst the other, especially compared to the next one you have up and some of the others. There's at least 3 guys who, in one case, 2 of them have played a significant amount this past year with Porter and Beanie Bishop. Like, you kind of know what you're getting with those guys. And then with Trice, there's upside potential there if he can stay healthy because of his physical gifts. So you at least have 3 guys that theoretically, if everything goes right, could be starting caliber for you. We can't say that about some of the other positions that we're going to talk about. So I think it's definitely fair that it needs to be one of the top 5 needs, but it's not as dire as some of the other positions we're going to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And for what it's worth, I should mention that Dante Jackson is an unrestricted free agent. I don't have any interest in bringing him back. I know that he had the 5 interception season. I think that's great. Takeaways are great. But, man, if your down-to-down coverage isn't good, and it wasn't, particularly late in the season, I don't have any interest in bringing that guy back. I would look to get younger and maybe bigger on the boundaries to get something that more matches that mold that they're looking for, and they can play the defense they want to play there. Boundary cornerback, we're seeing some notes in the chat here too. Yeah. Boundary cornerback is the way to go in terms of what you want to find in terms of talent. I think it's easier to replace slot cornerbacks, but again, there are various tiers of nickel cornerbacks in the NFL too. I mean, guys that are really, really good and guys that are bad, like we saw in Pittsburgh. And so it makes a difference too. If the opposing team slot receiver is constantly wide open, you've got an issue there. So we can't act like it's not a position that doesn't need addressed at all.
Yeah, I did want to throw this chat real quick, because you mentioned earlier from our Barley 18. Come on, guys. Chances 1 through 5 that Dino ends up in Latrobe. Dino Tomlin, you talking about? I don't know, care, want to talk about it. good for him if he does. I literally don't care. There's guys who show up at Latrobe every year who don't have a single shot of playing in the NFL. So why not? I don't really care. Like if you know, I really don't. So
would that be more nepotency than like Bronny James and LeBron? Or
much more, because at least Bronny probably will be an NBA player, a caliber guy at some point. He just shouldn't have been drafted yet. That's all. So
no, and don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but nothing would surprise me.
Yeah, I don't care. My answer is I don't care.
Number 4 on the list of positional needs, I have running back here. Now, again, some people would argue this is a higher need, especially when you consider that Najee Harris isn't under contract. Jaylen Warren is a restricted free agent, who I expect the team will bring back. Cordarrelle Patterson, you can cut and save $2.8 million, which I would have done yesterday because he wasn't good this year and he didn't offer anything as a return man. A couple of nice runs throughout the year. It's not worth bringing him back and going to be age 34 season, I think, for Cordarrelle Patterson. Yeah. So you could be looking at potentially an entirely new room. I think a new room with the exception of Warren. I think that Warren comes back. But even with that, this is still a need for Steelers, one of the biggest ones on the team. Just so happens, Shayne, that this is a really strong running back class. Really strong. And my thoughts on the running back position in general, but if you can spend a day 2 pick on a running back every 4 or 5 years, I'm perfectly fine with that. I get irked when teams spend first round draft capital on running backs and end up not being these transcendent players. Like the capital should be spent elsewhere more often than not, but this class is loaded, particularly on day 2. I think that there's going to be a lot of guys on day 2 that go, like if you could steal like a Caleb Johnson or something in the second round, Travion Henderson, like there's some really, really enticing options that will absolutely be where the value lines up with the need. But I've got running back 4th. Shayne, do you agree or disagree with me slotting it there?
I agree with it being 4 over corner simply because, again, like you technically have one guy who can be a starter for you if you bring Warren back, but he is restricted. I do assume that that's going to be the case, but again, it's technically until that happens, the room is essentially Cordarrelle Patterson, who isn't going to probably play for them this year. So again, I already see chats about like, oh, no way I'm putting cornerback over or running back over cornerback. And again, I get it, but we're not ranking necessarily like positions of importance. It's how desperately do they need to invest in this position just to have like a quality player at that spot, because corner does have 3 guys who at least have the potential to be starters, right? Or have already been starters for us. It makes it a little bit easier to put running back over this, especially because let's be honest about it, guys. They want to run the football. It does not matter who the quarterback is this year. They're going to want to run the football.
We're not going to change their mind about that either.
That's just not going to, that's a non-negotiable. So at least you can make it so the running back room is so good that even though they weren't good at running the ball last year, they might be by default. Like at least you can try to do that. If you give me Warren and you give me a 2nd or 3rd round running back in this class, they're probably going to be really good at running the football. Like that's just what it's going to be. So I think it's really important that they do that. And if they don't draft a running back in this class, I legitimately don't know what I'm going to do with myself, because for you to run the ball as much as you did and then not invest in the position at all this year of all years, I can't do it. Like they have to draft a running back somewhere on day 2, in my opinion, or else I'm going to be really upset. So.
Well, we talk about windows lining up all the time. This window is lining up. You can get out of Najee and you can replace him with somebody who is younger, burstier, more explosive, and you can do that with a day 2 pick. You don't have to spend a 1st round pick to do that. And so 100% there. And again, I like Jaylen Warren. I think he took a step back this year, largely because of injuries. But you can't trust him because of the injury stuff either. I don't think he's a guy that can carry the load from game to game because
very much
no, like you want to invest more in that position, and the Steelers are going to be dead set on running the football, so you might as well get guys that can do it at a high level, at least maximize that potential of your team. Number 3, Shayne, I've got interior defender, and I say interior defender because you can go a number of ways with this. I want a versatile guy, preferably a guy that can slide around the defensive line. Absolutely. Would I want Cameron Hayward's replacement? Yes. I don't know if we're ever going to get that guy again, or at least not for a long time, but a guy who can hold up at the point of attack, who can 2 gap if need be, who still offers something as a pass rusher. If you can't get all of those things, Shayne, I at least want somebody who can hold up at the point of attack, because that's their most pressing issue right now. You got run on for 299 yards in the playoff loss to the Ravens. You can't let that happen again. I cannot go a third year with Keanu Benton playing zero tech. I mean, he just has no business doing that. You need to get a young, talented player in a position that's going to be much more favorable for him. So I would love a run stuffer, but I think you can go with multiple interior defenders in this draft. A guy that can play 5 tech, a guy that can play 0 tech for the Steelers, whatever. I wouldn't be surprised, Shayne, if the room looks very different during the 2025 season. You really, outside of Hayward and Benton, I don't care who stays and who goes. In fact, I'd prefer most of them go after that point, because Ogunjobi's not worth the money. He can't hold up against the run. Montravius Adams can't hold up against the run. Dean Lowry can't hold up against the run. They need to find guys who are better at the point of attack. And that's why I have it as the third biggest need on the team.
Yeah, I totally agree, because, again, you have two guys who you're very confident about, at least for next year. Now, Hayward, until he decides to quit, I'm just going to assume he's good, right? Like until he's not playing anymore, I'm just going to assume he's locking down a spot. Benton obviously locks down a spot. You do need primarily, like, if you can't get a true, like, do-it-all player, you have to get somebody who can actually play nose tackle. You just have to. It doesn't have to be a high pick as long as it's someone you think can do it, but you have to find somebody who can alleviate some of that pressure off of Cam, because as great as a run defender as he was, he's still, getting up there in age. You want him to be able to still affect the passer more. He was great at it this year. You want him to be able to do it again next year. And you don't want Benton playing that position. I'm sorry. You don't. Like, he theoretically has the size. He just doesn't have he's just not able to do it the same way that you'd like him to. He's much more of a true pass rusher. So free him up to do that, right? Like, get somebody in there that you're confident can play on first and second down all the time and do stuff like that. So that's definitely the number one goal. But if you can add a true impact player that can do everything, obviously that should be one of the priorities that you have.
All right, Shayne, number 2 on my list. Some will disagree about this, and I understand why. Wide receiver is number 2. It's not number 1, it's number 2, and I'm going to explain why in just a second. It's still a really big need. This is a really big need. Outside of George Pickens, and maybe even with George Pickens, you don't have a wide receiver on this team that you can trust. And I say that about George Pickens because you couldn't trust him on a game-to-game basis to try his hardest and to be consistent. And right down the stretch of the season, had that 3-drop performance, 0 catch, 3 drops. I mean, and then there's other times you look at the Dallas game on Sunday Night Football, just the biggest lackluster effort you'll ever see. If you go back and watch the L22, I've got it in my highlights on X if you want to go check that out. I cut up every snap of his, and he wasn't trying. I will confidently say that without knowing his motives, he was not trying in that game. And so I can't trust Pickens to be that guy. I can't trust the other players on the roster to be that guy. The one that you have probably the most hope for is the guy that's played 5 snaps is Roman Wilson. And we have no idea what he's going to be for the Steelers. I thought Calvin Austin showed flashes. I'm perfectly fine with him as a wide receiver 4. Wide receiver 3 at the absolute most. He should not be a starting wide receiver in the NFL, though. Van Jefferson was putrid. Mike Williams was not worth the trade compensation, though he did give him the one over-the-shoulder catch that helped Steelers win the Washington game. It just wasn't good overall. You got nothing out of him because he couldn't separate. So, and then, I mean, honestly, revamp the room. I'm fine with making 2 or 3 switches here. If you want to keep Ben Skoranek as your special teams ace, I'm perfectly good with that. He's a great special teams player. But you need to find a wide receiver, a bona fide number 1 wide receiver, which I don't know if you can do this offseason, barring coming short of signing T. Higgins, but getting one in the draft who could be that role, who can play the X for you, who can be a go-to guy in your passing game that you can trust to run good routes and catch the football, because Steelers don't have that guy right now.
Yeah, again, like, Pickens in a vacuum might be the best player in the position groups outside of interior guys that we talk about today. Like, that might be the strongest player in terms of on the field ability, but he just isn't. You don't want him to be the guy in the passing game simply because he hasn't shown the ability to play consistently and with the right amount of effort, like you talked about. He can be the receiver too, and you hope he has big games here and there. Like, you can win offensively with that type of player as your receiver too. They need somebody who can be the go-to guy, like you just talked about, somebody who can do the things that he isn't as good at as going up down the field and catching the football. So whether that's an Emeka Egbuka type that's kind of an inside-out player, primarily inside, but is really good at that, whether it's someone down the draft later on that maybe has that potential. whatever it may be. But that is something they have to address, whether it's in free agency, whether it's with trade, whether it's with draft, like something, and probably 2 or 3 swings potentially in some way, shape, or form. Like that's the other thing too, because you hope Roman Wilson is a player for you, but you didn't get to find anything out about him this year, and that's always disappointing. But outside of him, there's not a lot of really true hope on the roster right now.
100%. And that brings us to the number one biggest positional need of the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2025 is quarterback.
Yes.
It's quarterback. You got Skylar Thompson on the roster and nobody else. The guys you had on the roster last year weren't good enough. I'm willing to agree with you, Shayne. I would give Fields one more chance if that's your best option this year. At least he's young. At least he's got wheels. But you need a quarterback. Nothing's going to work right until you get one. You look at the teams around the league, and the Eagles are in the situation with Jalen Hurts, but he's still a $50 million quarterback. And so you have to find, and with the league's best roster around him. So if you don't have a quarterback, you better have a really good roster. And so you're probably not going to end up with both of those things. They need to keep taking swings until you find one. I don't think that there's probably a game-wrecking franchise quarterback in this draft class, Shayne, but it's got to happen at some point. That needs to be the focus of this team, because until you find a franchise quarterback, you are always going to be at a severe disadvantage. And so regardless, this is not, again, I'm not ranking what I think the Steelers will focus the most on this year, but this is their biggest need now and in the future. They need a quarterback.
Yeah, it'll remain, again, this is, if you're talking about team building perspective, regardless of how much you value quarterback or don't right now, no matter what your opinion of like whether it matters they get a quarterback, which I know some people have already said, out in social media in this chat, like they don't care about the quarterback because Mike Tomlin's the coach. They don't think he's capable of having a good quarterback, whatever. Until you have a franchise quarterback, the only thing that matters is finding them. Like that's just what it comes down to in the NFL. Now you can do everything else right in the meantime. You can build your team up. You can find the right time to add a quarterback. You can do this or do that. But at the end of the day, if you don't have one, you don't have a real chance in the league. Because even the Eagles, like Jalen Hurts is kind of in that middle tier of quarterbacks, but because of the offense he plays and because of the skill set that he has, he is still a franchise quarterback. He is. Maybe not the ideal one, but he is one for them because he's good enough to make that roster and that offense work. We don't have that right now. And we don't have the roster talent around a quarterback of that caliber to make that work. So we need one even better than him, most likely.
Yeah, it's a quarterback-driven league, and everybody else is just living in it right now. Steelers are one of those teams that are just living in it. All right, Shayne, we're going to sign up with our Super Bowl predictions one more time. You picked the Chiefs when we talked about this last week, right? Have you changed your mind?
I have not, because frankly, and I will go down doing this from now until they give me a reason not to, I'm going to just keep betting on the Chiefs to keep doing this thing until they show me they can't, because if they were able to do it the past couple years with the roster they had, despite losing Tyreek Hill and some of the other stuff, despite Travis Kelce slowing down, I think they can do it again. Now, do I think the Eagles are firmly capable of beating this team? Of course. I think that they have more talent across the board pretty much. I just believe in the quarterback and the coaching so much more with the Chiefs that it's really hard not to pick them. I think it's going to be a really fun game. Honestly, I really do. I think it's going to be a close game. But if it's a close game, we kind of already know who wins, most likely.
Yeah, when these two teams faced in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, the Chiefs won a 38-35 game. I do think the Chiefs win as well for the same reasons that you outlined. I think the score will be a little bit lower this time. Let's call it 28-24-ish. But I do think they're gonna give us a good game. If you have any Super Bowl predictions, drop them down in the chat. Please leave us a comment. If you like this stream, Shayne and I will be off next week, taking a little bit of PTO time, and then we'll be back in the swing of things for the combine, free agency, the NFL draft. We're excited to bring you live mock drafts. That was something fun that we did last year as well. So stick with us for that. We go live on the show every Wednesday, with the exception of next week at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Also check out Josh Yorish's live show on Mondays at 1:30. So if you're listening to us, you're not listening to Josh, make sure you tune in on Mondays at 1:30 as well. Thank you for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on X at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on X at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube, or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain Steelers podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.